Pleasure and true honor to be leading this incredible organization that all of you Angelenos should be proud of. We are one of the world's largest natural history museums, of course, NHM here, and La Brea Tar Pits in Hancock Park, and you'll be hearing from Dr. Regan Dunn later on. And we are at the center of nature and culture. So we are more than pleased to have this event tonight. I also want to say that you're here in our brand new wing and theater, NHM Commons. Isn't it beautiful? And we are excited to host conversations like you're going to be involved with tonight. It's a wonderful space to have convenings. Before we start with the program, I do want to read our land acknowledgement. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Quiche, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these land and waters. We acknowledge that settler colonization resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to truth, healing, and reconciliation, and to elevating the stories, culture, and community of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these ancestral lands. We are dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native peoples and local tribal governments, including, in no particular order, the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, Gabrielino Tongva Indians of California Tribal Council, Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians Quiche Nation, San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. And please go to the LA County and City Native American Commission website to learn more about their work, and our website to learn more about what we do with our tribal communities. Thank you. So as I said, we're delighted to host tonight's program with Zócalo Public Square, Carnegie, California, and Flavors from Afar. And I'm pleased to introduce Ian Klaus, founding director of Carnegie, California.
Thanks, Lori. I'm a writer, so I'm used to reading to empty rooms, and so this is a very foreign activity to me, I must say. I will, though, read. I'm Ian Klaus, the founding director of Carnegie, California, and we're incredibly delighted and excited to be co-hosting this event with the Natural History Museum of LA County, Zócalo Public Square, and Flavors from Afar. Carnegie, California is the West Coast center of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the oldest think tank in the United States, with more than 170 scholars spread out around the world doing nonpartisan, nonprofit research. Carnegie, California has scholars spread out across the state, San Franciscans, San Diegans, Angelenos, Dodger fans increasingly, Giants fans less so. And we operate 2,000 miles from the nearest national capital, which is not Washington, D.C. And we do so because we believe the knowledge and policies needed to address our most pressing problems, from housing to recovery to climate and even democratic backsliding, require the input and expertise of communities, cities, and states. You'll hear from one of our stellar scholars, Liliana Gamboa, shortly on climate migration and mobility. But in the meantime, let me say our scholars all over the world sit in admiration of the culture and communities in Los Angeles and Los Angeles County and the resilience therein. And we who are working here in California know the value and necessity of communities shaping their own recovery. On behalf of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, our colleagues in the Great Sustainability, Climate, and Geopolitics program that runs out of DC, and most importantly, those of us working here in California, we're incredibly excited and humbled to be part of the conversation tonight. And with that, I'm incredibly happy to introduce Bianca Collins, the Director of Public Programs for Zócalo.
Thank you, Ian. As he said, I'm Bianca Collins. I'm Director of Public Programs for Zócalo Public Square. We're a unit of Arizona State University Media Enterprise. At Zócalo, our mission is to connect people to ideas and to each other. Everything we do is free, and everyone is welcome. We publish original writing and present conversations like this one. You can find us at zocalopublicsquare.org, on podcast platforms, and YouTube, so please subscribe for our latest programs. We were founded in 2003, and we are now celebrating our 21st birthday year. Our program tonight asks, how can our world rethink climate mobility? I'll now introduce our moderator. Simon Romero is an international correspondent for the New York Times. Based in Mexico City, he travels widely to write about Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. He was previously the Times' Brazil bureau chief, based in Rio de Janeiro, and Andean bureau chief, based in Caracas, Venezuela. He also covered the American West as a national correspondent based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He was born and raised in New Mexico and graduated with honors from Harvard College. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Hello and welcome. I'm Simon Romero, and I am an international correspondent for the New York Times. I am very pleased to introduce our guests for this conversation. Tanya Aguiñiga was born in 1978 in San Diego, California, and raised in Tijuana, Mexico. An artist and craftsperson, Aguiñiga works with traditional craft materials like natural fibers and collaborates with other artists and activists to create sculptures, installations, performances, and community-based art projects. Drawing on her upbringing as a binational citizen who daily crossed the border from Tijuana to San Diego for school, Aguiñiga's work speaks of the artist's experience of her divided identity and aspires to tell the larger and often invisible stories of the transnational community. She is the founder of Ambos, art made between opposite sides, an ongoing series of projects that provides a platform for binational artists. Regan Dunn is the interim assistant deputy director and assistant curator at La Brea Tar Pits and Museum. As a paleobotanist, Dunn researches the interplay between climate, plants, evolution, and extinction during time periods of rapid change. Her research has been featured in numerous outlets, including Science Magazine, the New York Times, LA Times, and NPR. Dunn received her PhD in biology from the University of Washington and has conducted research at several globally important fossil sites across the Americas. She was hired as the Tar Pits' first ever paleobotanist in 2019. Liliana Gamboa is a non-resident scholar in the Sustainability, Climate, and Geopolitics program at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Prior to joining Carnegie, Liliana was program manager at the Open Society Foundations, where she focused on the intersection between climate change and migration. Liliana has over 15 years of experience working in the human rights field, from designing and implementing anti-discrimination projects in Dominican Republic, Colombia, and Chile, to climate justice work in the Caribbean, to right to truth work and accountability for grave crimes in Guatemala and Mexico, to strengthening the institutions of the inter-American human rights system. She is originally from Chile, where she earned her BA from the University of Playa Ancha. Badruun Gardi is a social innovator, creative strategist, and educator from Mongolia, and he is joining us today from Tokyo. He is co-founder and chairman of the newly established New Nomad Institute, a research and action institute that aims to uncover the enduring knowledge of nomadic societies and apply these learnings towards addressing the climate crisis. Badruun is also co-founder of GareHub, a nonprofit social innovation firm that develops creative solutions to the challenges caused by rapid urbanization in Mongolia. Badruun is a member of the Climate Migration Council. He is a 2023 Loeb Fellow at Harvard University Graduate School of Design and received his bachelor's degree from Stanford University. Badruun, as I mentioned, is joining us from across the sea in Tokyo. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to remind our audience that we'll be taking questions towards the end of the program. If you're watching online, you can also submit questions to the live chat on YouTube. And with that, let's get underway. Liliana, I'm going to start off with you.
Okay.
So can you just tell us really what is climate mobility and how is it linked to climate change?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. So life in general has been shaped by climate. Most species, generally speaking, have evolved to survive and thrive in their environments. And if conditions change, or when conditions change, then they tend to adapt to the new environment or go and find somewhere more hospitable. Humans are the same. So today, as our climate changes, the places we call home are becoming either too dry, too hot, too wet, altering the habitability of the land we live in, the livelihoods we survive with, even our ability to feel safe, our human security. So inevitable, this is going to affect the choices that people do about their mobility. Now, the relationship between human mobility and climate change is not a straightforward linear one. And why is that? It's not simple either, because people's decision regarding moving are ranging, for example, from whether to move or not, or where to go, or how to do so, are highly contextual and depending on a wide variety of factors. So today, as our sea level rises, as growing seasons change, our extreme weathers become more frequent and intense, then people must consider the first question that we begin, that is, how to adapt, and they can do so by having the means and the resources to being able to continue living where they are or moving somewhere else to more safer, I'll say, from climate risk places.
Wonderful, thank you. And for Regan, can you talk a little bit about how the climate has changed in the last 200 years and how that underpins the climate mobility we're seeing today?
Yes, and thank you all for being here today. This is a pleasure to speak to you in this new space. Climate in the last 200 years has changed faster than in any other time in Earth history that we know of. So we are experiencing dramatic change that we will obviously experience more of. As geologists, we look at the deep time record and try to understand how quickly these changes have happened in the past to compare that to today. And just the level of carbon dioxide that humans are releasing into the atmosphere is about 10 times faster rate than at any other time pre-humans. And I'm not sure a lot of people really understand that, and our temperatures will be catching up. And we have global temperatures now that have risen over 1 degree, 1.2 degrees as a global mean temperature. Now, that might not seem like a lot, and that's in Celsius. That might not seem like a lot, but it takes a massive amount of energy to warm global temperature because we have huge oceans and big land masses. So that is a lot of energy that goes in to raise the temperatures that much. Now, temperatures on land rise even more. So, for example, in California, temperatures have risen over 3 degrees Celsius, so over 6 degrees Fahrenheit, in mean annual temperatures in the last 100 years. And that's much faster on land. And we can see those changes happening all around us. And as we go forward, we can expect even faster change and more dramatic change in temperature, precipitation regimes that cause these extreme weather events that we are starting to see in abundance.
Everywhere, I mean, including here in Los Angeles, quite unfortunate, very recently. A question for you, Badruun. What can Mongolia and its enduring traditions of nomadism teach us about climate mobility?
We can't hear you.
Oh, I think we're having a technical problem with.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Technical problem with you, Badruun, so we'll come back to you in just a little bit if that's okay. Well, for you, Tanya, I mean, can you know you do a lot of work right on the border. You must be seeing a lot happening. I just in recent days, even. Can you give us a sense of kind of just human mobility trends and developments that you're seeing there in Tijuana or in other places along the border?
Yeah, so I grew up a few blocks away from the border fence, before there was a fence. And
Can you hear me?
yeah, we can hear you now.
We'll be right back with you, Badruun.
I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Okay. And so, I mean, my whole life was shaped by, witnessing migration and, really questioning my own privilege as a US citizen to be able to cross the border every day back and forth. And, so a lot of the 80s and 90s was when we would have thousands of people just, waiting for a moment to cross the border into the US. And then, we kind of have different dips that happen at the border because of safety issues, because of different waves of violence that, come to different regions. And then the migration path kind of shifts to other areas. Also, depending on the climate, like a lot of people found it easier to cross through San Diego, which the weather's much more mild, than through Arizona, where, you have to cross the Sonoran Desert. So there's a bunch of different factors that kind of shape, who's coming and where people are coming to. But, since 2017, 2016, we had, a lot of folks coming from Cuba because of Obama changing the laws for Cuba, the wet foot, dry foot law. And then after that, we had, so it's constantly kind of changing. And I think people, that don't see or are not part of communities that, are places where migration constantly happens. I think they don't understand, who it is that's coming, And so we started doing a lot of work with asylum seekers and refugees at the border in Tijuana mostly, because there was such misunderstanding of who it was. And my parents still live in Mexico, and they were like, "Don't come and help. Like, these people are the worst." And I was like, "What are you talking about? Where are you getting information?" And she's like, "Facebook." And so, and so then I went down, and because she was like, "No, they're like malandros, they're like bad people." And then I went, and it was, when we had the large caravan of 40,000 people in Tijuana, and it was mostly like grandmas in wheelchairs, moms with their children, and so I was like, oh my God, like, why don't people ever, why do we trust the things that we hear instead of trusting our own eyes and going to see what is really happening? Do people need help? And so, so it's been really different, and it's been kind of constantly shifting. So right now we have a lot of people from Russia. We have a lot of people from China. But it's, yeah, constantly kind of changing, but also constantly, I think our communities at the border on the southern side have done a really good job of being flexible and asking for help. So we constantly have to figure out, like how do we get translators that speak, different languages, like Haitian. Yeah, anyways.
Um, and now for you, Badruun, going back to just the question about Mongolia, I mean, really, what can its traditions of nomadism teach us about climate mobility? Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Apologies about that. Tech, you know, glitches always seem to happen. And lately I've been very negative about tech, so perhaps the AI gods picked up on that and wanted to censor me before I get going. Um, Thank you so much for having me, and I apologize for not being there in person. And first and foremost, my heart goes out to all residents of Los Angeles for the terrible wildfires of late. Um, and I think it's this topic that we're addressing is incredibly important as we can see, all the challenges around the world. And I think Mongolia is in a unique position to um, perhaps start a conversation around how we need to be thinking in alternative ways. We need to figure out a third way, or more than three, hopefully. It's we I believe Mongolia is the last remaining country in the world where we have such a vibrant nomadic culture that permeates our entire nation's culture, economy, and politics at a very substantial level. And going back to what Liliana said, this issue of climate mobility is something that humans have always dealt with or have adapted to. But for some reason now, I think most people believe that nomadism and nomadic culture is something that's very strange and different. When in fact, if you really think about it, for the vast, vast majority of human history, um, humans have been nomadic. And I think, what we see globally right now is this failure of the political and economic system that's overwhelming nature and climate, and is really distressing the entire planet. And I think what's important now, more than anything, is really to sort of hopefully break out of our tunnel vision, to think more broadly about what is needed for us to thrive as a humanity.
Just such a fascinating perspective, Badruun. Thank you. Moving on to Liliana, I mean, we really want to know just how countries are addressing climate mobility so far. And I remember in speaking with you when we had the chance to talk before this panel, you mentioned the example of the countries of the Eastern Caribbean, which I just found fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So there is not like one single governance framework right now to protect or to address the issue of climate mobility. I want to step back for a minute and say that we use climate mobility, even though there is no consensus about what is the proper terminology or concept that should be used for this phenomenon, for this intersection. And we use that because that's like an umbrella term that encompasses the types of movement that have been identified with climate change right now. Those are migration, which is the movement that involves some sort of degree of agency that can be within or across borders. We identify displacement, which is a forced movement can also happen within or outside a country's border, and planned relocation, which is a planned process in which a group of people moved because of the inhabitability of the land, and it's permanent in time, usually within the borders of a country. But there is a fourth category that I would argue needs to be considered when discussing mobility in the context of climate change, which is immobility. That means communities who are living in places of high risk climate risk, but two things: who cannot move or don't want to move. And so that's when we refer to two types of movement, of immobility, really. One, voluntary one, which is the one, for example, in the Pacific Islands, citizens are fighting for their right to stay, despite the fact that they know that they have high climate risk conditions, but they have attachment to the land due to cultural reasons, etc. And then forced immobility, that is people who, despite needing to flee or wanted to move, cannot because of a variety of reasons, which include economic resources or demographic conditions, etc. So the responses from countries to this phenomenon, why I make this sort of long explanation, is because there is a variety of situations happening. It's not one challenge, is not one situation, and therefore countries are doing a wide variety of things. I mean, it's not going to be a one-size-fit-all approach. So some states are actually going to the courts. Chile and Argentina, for example, file a request to get guidance from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights to see what the scope of their obligations in addressing not only climate change, but also climate change in relation to human mobility. Free movement arrangements that are provisions that sometimes are included within economic agreements, whether bilateral or multilateral, such as the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, are also a way that can be helpful, in particularly this one, because it includes not only access to the territory and ability to stay and reside there, but also the portability of social rights, which is crucial in times of moving due to a disaster, because at times you might think that that's a temporary situation, but then it becomes permanent where you're not able to, for example, reconstruct for whatever reason. So it involves different times, lengths, durations, etc. So that's a good, for example, model that if done in a way that is climate conscious, then it could work. Another interesting development that has been recent is an agreement between Australia and Tuvalu. It's called the Falebli Union, and it's considered one of the first bilateral climate agreements. That is because I find it has two interesting components to it. So it's migration pathways for Tuvaluans to go live in Australia. But it has two concepts that I want to highlight tonight. That is, one is mobility with dignity, is what is called in the agreement, and it involves that people will not only have access to the territory, permanent residency, but also access to healthcare, education, and even settlement support in the same sense that any Australian would have. And then there is a second component that is interesting, which is Australia commits to support resilience efforts for Tuvalu, which it's really crucial because it's an approach that really allows choice, meaning for those who want to stay, they are making efforts so that they are able to. At the same time, they are providing migration pathways for those who cannot or don't want to anymore.
So fascinating to hear what's going on in different parts of the world. Kind of encouraging also in some ways. I guess just to kind of step back in time a little bit, human beings have been migrating maybe forever, but for a very, very long time. Regan, can you tell us about your research at the La Brea tar pits and how climate change plus human actions caused the extinction of megafauna there?
Sure. I don't know if many of you have been to the La Brea tar pits, you've seen our spectacular megafauna. And if you can imagine walking around that landscape 15,000 years ago with 6 major cats that could eat you, the smallest one being the mountain lion, the largest one being the African lion, which is much larger than the American lion, much larger than the African lion is today. This would be a kind of a terrifying place. Herds of buffalo, bison, horses, ground sloths, and of course our emblematic saber-toothed cat. So before humans arrived, these megafauna were thriving in this environment, and these scenes play out at the La Brea tar pits over the last 60,000 years. And during that time period, there's very little extinction. But we have recently discovered that at 13,000 years ago, all of the large animals disappeared. They're just gone. And so once we discovered the timing of their disappearance, we were able to go back and reconstruct the reasons why by looking at paleo-environmental records. And so what we learned from that, a couple things that Californians don't want to hear, is that we can have longer droughts than 20 years, much longer droughts. And so this time period of the decline of the megafauna, we experienced several droughts that were 200, 300 years in duration. During this dramatic period of warming, when the ice sheets were melting. And so in a 1,000-year time period, our temperatures rose about 5.5 degrees Celsius. And now if you guys remember when I mentioned earlier that today parts of California that our temperatures have risen are already 3 degrees. So anyway, at 5.5 degrees, the systems are very bleached, they're dried out, the trees start dying. And then all of a sudden, we see this occurrence of fire, and a lot of fire. And we see this by looking at charcoal in lake bottoms. And this sudden occurrence of fire occurred at a very critical time period when things were very dry, when there was a lot of biomass, and when things were very warm. This sounds familiar to today. And then these fires lasted for about 300 years. So these weren't just one mega fire that came through like we've experienced recently, but a 300-year period where many different parts of the ecosystem are burning. It happens that there's not very much lightning in California. If you guys are coastal Californians, I don't know when the last time you saw any lightning was, but I haven't seen any in a while. And so we attribute this increase in fires to sources that are similar to a majority of the fire causes today, and that's human beings. And so we know that humans were in Southern California 13,000 years ago. Some of the oldest human remains in North America are found on Santa Rosa Island in the Channel Islands. So humans are here. And through our favorite tool, fire, we believe that human activities, along with this climate aridity problem, really transformed California's ecosystems and led to the extinction of the megafauna, which was probably really useful at that time because then humans could, be in this landscape without these very large predators all around. It's a complicated story. There's a lot of feedbacks and interactions, but that's sort of the gist of it. And we know that humans were in North America even before that. They might not have been in great numbers. We know that some of the earliest human evidence comes from footprints in White Sands, New Mexico, your home state. And there are human footprints alongside of megafauna, giant ground sloth, and mammoth footprints that are about 23,000 years old. So humans got here somehow. They may have arrived down through the ice sheets, down through Beringia, a window in time when the ice sheets were crossable. Or in our case in California, people probably arrived along the coast using coastal resources. And so people can move really fast. You know, they went from Beringia to South America in no time. And might find that surprising, but you can hike the Pacific Crest Trail, you know, all of North America in 4 months. So people can really move. Yeah.
Big time.
And create change everywhere we go, adapting the environments to our needs.
Wow, very quickly, 300 years of fire, my goodness. What an image. But Badruun, going back to Mongolia for a moment. Just had a question. What are gers, which are also known as yurts, and how do they serve the nomadic traditions in Mongolia?
Thank you. Excellent question. I've been working on gears for about the last 8 years now, and initially started off thinking about how we can modernize the gear to be more suitable for current urban environments. And I collaborated with many international and well-known architects and designers and engineers. And what happened is towards the end, I realized that actually there's, more to learn from our traditional gears for the world of design and architecture now than perhaps what we can add to it. The gear is a form of mobile housing, and a lot of people internationally may think of it as sort of like a tent, but you really have to go inside one to understand that it's really not a tent. It's a much more permanent dwelling and feeling. It's very homely. The insulation is made from felt, which gives a very warm, comfortable vibe. It's extremely mobile. It's very lightweight. You can build it within an hour if you know what you're doing. And it's really the tool that allows our herders to be so mobile and to be to have the ability to constantly move. And one of the aspects that I really love about the gear is that it, for example, doesn't have any foundation, so you don't need a permanent foundation. It's just set on uh, the ground on the grass. And once you move away, the grass there just regrows. So there's really no permanent scar on the earth. And one of the things that I used to always be, when I was younger, uh, sort of upset about is Mongolia has this grand history. If you go back 800 years, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. But if you go and visit Mongolia now, and this is the trouble I had with friends who would come, is there's really not much to see. If you go to Rome or if you go to some other, other ancient capital, there's, all those sorts of statues and buildings. But in Mongolia, none of that exists. And all you see is basically nature as it is. But more and more, I've started to think about how beautiful that is. How, we as humans don't necessarily need uh, to create these permanent marks on the world. That, we come from nature and we go back to nature. And even the greatest, emperors, Khans of our time, of our history, Chinggis Khan, or you may know him as Genghis Khan, he lived in a ger. And it's a dwelling that is a single room round dwelling, and it invites people to come in, and it creates an atmosphere of sharing and of conversation and discussion. And it's just something that I think we need more of now, all around the world.
Oh, you make me want to go to Mongolia, uh, Badruun, really, very
Please
much.
come.
Um, Tanya, I kind of want to ask you a bit of a conceptual question. You know, the border itself has changed in many places over the past 10 years or so, in recent decades. It's become highly militarized and a lot of surveillance going on. Um, Walls have been built. Is it possible, and maybe this is kind of a crazy question to ask at this very moment, but is it possible to envision a border without walls? And what would that look like from your point of view?
So I just finished doing a residency at UCSD, um, where I was spending time with their archive and their library. And I was going through the archives of the Border Art Workshop, which I was a part of in the 90s and early 2000s. And they used to do performances, like big theatrical performances at the border where people were waiting to cross. And what I was most excited was for to find pictures and to spend a little bit of time, even if it's just in my imagination, hanging out in a time period with no walls. And so I was like, that just sounds so beautiful right now. And what really sucked is that I found pictures and it was 1993 with no wall. And so it just broke my heart. And I just, yeah, was like, and I couldn't believe that, what we think of now as like walls and like deterrence and all of this like super militarized thing, yeah, as recent as like our own lifetimes, didn't exist. And so I kept thinking like, oh, is my brain different than the brains of those that were born after 1993? Because I constantly am fighting for things to be different, but they have grown up in a world where that was not a possibility. Um, and so one of the things that was also really telling in going through these archive photos, is that there was so many portraits of the families that were waiting to cross, and it was full families, but they were dressed in party clothes. So it was people that were just gonna go to the US to go to a family party or something and then just go back to Mexico. And I know that, a lot of us that grew up at the border that have family on both sides, like we know that there's always been a flow. And for the most part, a lot of people don't want to come here because their stuff is, somewhere else. So you want to stay with your stuff and your family. You don't want to like go somewhere where you don't know anybody, have no money, don't know how to speak the language. But yeah, it was really shocking, because I just felt like in those portraits of families waiting to cross, and there was also children playing soccer, and so I was like, oh my God, these are so heartbreaking to see images of people in transit in the middle of mobility, but being happy and being normal children, being, families in very dignified, like white socks with lace, folded over on the little girls, and so yeah, it made me really sad just to think of how now we're not just deterring the flow, but we're actually causing so much more damage and trauma and death and injuries and paralyzations. So a really big thing that I've been trying to get people to pay attention to is that the new border walls that they've put up are 30 feet high, which means that that's 3 stories. So it's even taller than this building. So that is a fall height that was never tested on if humans fall. Do they survive? What types of injuries do they get? So since the border wall was increased to that 30-foot height, we've had it's like 400% increase of deaths, and it's like pregnant women, grandparents. So I think it's really important that we do think about when we're talking about, can we do things differently? How can we learn that we do really think about dignity, and that we do really think about not just, oh, now we have to share like the Northern Hemisphere, like, oh, like we're mad, but really thinking about how do we set people up for success, because we don't ever do that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's take some questions now from the audience. Bianca, over to you.
Okay, if you have a question, I'm going to ask you to come over to me on the stage here, and you can ask your question into the microphone. In the meantime, we're going to start with one of the many questions we had submitted via the wristband and online. The first question is, what are the projected safest places to live in the next 30 to 50 years?
Yeah. But people said there's no climate refuge, no? Everywhere is something.
Everywhere, yeah, but there's some places that expect to, see less change. The Great Lakes, folks, looking good in the Great Lakes. I think the secret's getting out, but there's lots of water, and agriculture will be moving that direction. And Canada, I don't know how Canada feels about us now, but might be something. Maybe we can talk to them about climate mobility. Basically, higher latitude, higher elevation, but that will only take you so far.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Francisco Medina. I have a question. The idea, like, we're in Los Angeles, and the idea of the dream of what Los Angeles is, bringing all the water down from the State Water Project, the Metropolitan Project, there was an idea that they knew people were going to come here. So it wasn't just like random client migration, it was planned because of like infrastructure projects that were going to take 50 to 75 years to come to fruition. And I haven't heard any discussion about that here. I do know that it was the marvel of the world, like the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Grand Coulee Dam, the Hoover Dam, all that. The whole world wanted to emulate that. And it was the IMF and the World Bank that prevented the spread of these types of projects because of the conditionalities they gave to the loans for, Africa, South America, and whatnot. Like these projects just never took off. And so where does that exist now in this discussion?
Can I maybe take a stab at it from a slightly, non-California, Southern California resident? I obviously don't know as well about the context, but I think what's clear is, most cities around the world are now having huge challenges associated with legacy infrastructure. These hard infrastructure built in that's incredibly difficult to update and change. And there's obviously, it takes a long period, purely sort of the engineering aspect, the technical aspect, but also the same with the policy side. And when you think about sort of nomadic societies, and even the city where I was born and raised, Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, historically Ulaanbaatar was a mobile city, and even that concept itself, I think, is incredibly fascinating and something worth thinking about and imagining and seeing if we can actually see contemporary modern mobile cities that rely much more on off-grid infrastructure, on clean energy, on our ability to actually change the sort of location where we're living, uh, dependent on the environmental context.
Okay, I'll move on to the next online question. And again, if anyone wants to ask a question, you can head on down here. Regan, the last time CO2 concentrations this high was 3 million years ago in the Pliocene epoch. Weren't sea levels much higher then? What should we be prepared for later this century?
Yes, that's always the question. And there is a lot of work going on mapping old coastlines And I think we can expect, depending on how quickly, for instance, we lose the western Antarctic ice sheet, we're looking at several meters of sea level rise, potentially up to 2 meters in sea level rise in a relatively short time period, maybe a couple, maybe 200 years. And so that's obviously going to cause a lot of movement inland. And think of Florida is very little of Florida is going to be present. You can look at the maps of. I feel you. That's good. Low-lying areas around Long Beach, around Venice Beach locally. Those are areas that I think you'll start seeing that first. Eastern seaboard, very significantly, with difficulty. So there's good data out there. The tectonics are always slightly different. Sea level's a little bit complicated depending on where the temperature centers are, but for our region, it's not good.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next question.
Hello, my name is Anthony, and I have a question about Mongolia, which is how does the government support the nomadic culture through its property laws or otherwise?
Thank you for that. Just to sort of take a step back and provide a bit of context, currently about 30% of our total population lives in a very traditional nomadic manner. But as I said, also, the whole philosophy and culture permeates everything at a national level. I think the difference of Mongolia compared to most, historically nomadic societies and countries is that our government has never really tried to sedentarize the population. The herding culture and the livestock that we are as a nation very dependent on is so central to our survival that the herders actually play an incredibly crucial role in the functioning of the state. And one aspect that I always find very interesting is Mongolia was actually the second communist country in the world after the Soviet Union. And we were under communism for 70 years and made a very peaceful transition to democracy and a market economy in 1990. And one of the main tenets of the revolution, the democratic revolution, was to provide private property to citizens. And so the government implemented the land privatization law in the early 2000s, and it went incredibly well in the urban areas. And then, so the government said, okay, let's, provide private land to the herders. And there was immense pushback from the herders because they said, why would we want to ever seclude ourselves to this smaller plot of land when currently all of this is ours? And so there's this strong belief of the commons and sort of this understanding, there almost this unwritten rule of how herders sort of rotate their livestock so that the pasture and the water resources are available for everyone. And so I think we have some of these systems and practices and policies that are quite unique that I think more and more people outside of Mongolia should take notice and take an interest in.
Thank you, Badruun. Okay, the next online question is, if national borders were designed for a static world, how can we reconceptualize them for a future where mobility is a survival strategy rather than an exception?
I think I can take this. Well, First of all, actually, I think that we need to stop. Cross-border mobility gets really the attention, the media attention, this image of people somehow coming from the south to the north. And the reality actually is that one, research has shown consistently that, first of all, most mobility will be internal. Second, most people don't want to move. So if the first alternative and what people want is actually plans, resources, having the means to adapt to where they are. So what we need to start is actually having this discussion. Are we preparing? Do we know what the climate risks are in our community, in the places that we live? Are we talking to our local authorities about it? Even places that might not be a risk, but are they going to be destination cities? As we were talking, the Great Lakes area, are they ready to receive? Are they making preparations? So there is so much that we need to start thinking, discussing spaces like this. I think there's a great role from academia, from civil society to start coming up with plans really about how do we adapt to this changing climate. And also, as Badruun was saying, learning from other places. For example, Fiji has guidelines on planned relocation. A trust fund was set up so that they can fund it because they know that they're going to have to relocate inland or even farther, if need be, several of the communities. So I think that we really need to start thinking first at home and where we are, what are where risks are, what is the, having people to have climate-informed decisions to where they want to live, work, invest even. So I think that we need to begin home before even we consider about whether we need to, look at our borders. And then, as other examples have shown, because when people do have to cross borders, they usually stay within the region. And I think actually sub-regions and regional agreements, there are enough tools to ensure that actually that mobility that is climate-related is in a safe, orderly, legal, and dignified way. We don't have much to create.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Oh. I do have one more question for you, Regan, which we talked about the past, but we haven't really gazed too much into the future. And you talked about extinction events, and what can you tell us about the survivors of extinction events, and why do they tend to be generalists? And just on a related point, what does this mean about the similarities between human beings and coyotes?
We're all scrappy. Yeah, so there's a lot of work trying to understand how to survive an extinction. And so to look at this, we look at all the animals that didn't make it and look at their characteristics. And it's always the case if you're a specialist and you have a small little niche or habitat and you don't travel very far and you don't have very many friends, you risk extinction. And so the things that survive extinction can live in lots of different environments. They can travel more widely, and they have a much more adaptable diet. They eat practically anything, and they're pretty mobile. And so that's pretty well describes humans. We have incredible ability to travel all around the world and even beyond. And coyotes, they have a similar lifestyle. So they're one of the great survivors of the megafaunal extinction, and they persist today, as well as our Native American California communities. They are here persisting and thriving in many ways in this environment through so much hardships and struggles and different time periods. And so it pays to be a generalist. Don't be too picky.
And omnivore also, right? I would
Yes, an omnivore, eating anything, but plant-based diets are good when you can.
Absolutely. Um, and for you, Liliana, just one last question. How can we address climate mobility in the current political atmosphere when so many countries are, not only our own, but around the world, when so many countries are putting up walls and restrictions?
Thank you. That's a great question, but I think it really goes back to the same point that I was making. It's an issue that is going to affect all of us and every community, and it's really not about the other. It's about everyone. And so we need to hit home and really think about what is that we need as communities, how do we resource resilience and adaptation, and understand that mobility, it's a way that we adapt too. So we need to ensure that those who need to move can do it in a proper way. There was actually in 2022 in the United States the government launched I think I have the name here because it's going to be a mouthful, a voluntary community-driven relocation program to assist tribal communities in Alaska who are facing coastal erosion and permafrost thawing, and working with them through funding and technical expertise how to determine the habitability of their land and when do they have to move and where they can begin moving. So it was actually, they awarded 111 million, I think, for 11 communities. For some of them to start moving, if they already had the land, infrastructure, and for others, smaller grants to start making this determination that I was speaking of. What led to, after that, to follow the initiative, it was the creation of a subcommittee on planned relocation. It was an interagency effort. It is, I think it still exists. An interagency effort that included Department of Interior, FEMA, executive offices, different offices. And it's that type of coordinating effort, thinking outside the box, putting effort, and working with the communities. In fact, actually, right after it was announced, I think several federal officers went to Alaska, sat with the community leaders for 3 days to start devising this plan. So I think that even though there is maybe a context where this othering it's becoming even more closer, but that doesn't stop us from start addressing what are the needs of our constituency, of every government, and obviously the more collaboration there is between the countries, the better to solve it. That's clearly going to be the case. It's going to require a lot of international cooperation, but that's not necessarily a way to stop us from beginning the discussion now in every community.
It's fantastic. I wish we could keep on talking, but this has been really great. It's time for us to close now. Tanya, Regan, Liliana, Badruun, thank you for a fantastic conversation. Please give our guests a round of applause. I also want to say thank you to Zócalo Public Square and Carnegie, California for co-presenting this program in partnership with the Natural History Museum of LA County and Flavors from Afar. You'll be able to find a summary of the program on Zócalo's website in the coming days, as well as interviews with all of the panelists. And please subscribe to Zócalo's newsletter, podcast, and social media for more great conversations. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Simon, for a fantastic conversation, and thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us. We hope to see you again at Zócalo's next program, What Alliances Do We Need in Perilous Times? This program will be on Thursday, March 13th at ASU California Center in downtown Los Angeles. As coalitions, partners, and allegiances shift and emerge, Zócalo and an alliance of partners will convene 2 back-to-back panels to discuss how we might best ally. Los Angeles Times columnist Gustavo Arellano will moderate a discussion about rebuilding LA in the wake of January's fires. And Zócalo columnist Joe Matthews will moderate a conversation about state, national, and global governance as a new U.S. administration takes power. Now, please continue the conversation with one another at our reception with food and beverage from Flavors from Afar, international sounds by Dublab DJ Ronnie De Leon, and vinyl deep listening sessions by Tana Jonas with Sounds from Afar.